he says it flew right over them, and it was a silver disc on fire. He said there was actual flames coming off this perfectly round silver disc, and it no sound, flew right over them. They ran into the apartment to go to the other side. My mom, who was a little girl at the time, remembers them running in to go to the window, and by the time they got to the other window, it was already at the other horizon. And he was blown away. He said, "You guys did it." He goes, "You not only did you create the environment, the craft is perfect. The interior of the craft is perfect." And I mean, we were very meticulous. This was a very, very meticulous group. My team was super attention to detail on this, and every step of the way was vetted by Bob. Every single thing we did, every color chosen, every material chosen, every texture chosen. We said, "Bob, we gotta," just before we went out there, so you think you could blow some stuff up? And he smiled and he goes, "Are you kidding?" He goes, "Of course we will."
The following is my conversation with Luigi Vendittelli. Luigi is a merchandiser and filmmaker. He's worked on a number of projects in his business, as well as being deep into the UFO subject with his movement, We Are Not Alone, and now with Project Gravitaur, working with the one and only Bob Lazar. Luigi has been deep into the subject of UFOs, UAP, since age 9, and discusses the journey to where he is today, from the youngest member of MUFON to national director of MUFON in Canada, to now recreating S4 and flying saucers with Bob Lazar. A genuinely lovely guy, and it was a real pleasure talking to him. So, the following is my conversation with Luigi Vendittelli. Thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been a crazy day today.
I'm hoping to hear all about it, but I've just to sort of jump in. Really, I've been seeing some clips popping up with you and Bob and the DeLorean. I don't know if you can just about see on the shelf just over there. Where are we?
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, I see
little
that.
DeLorean there. Absolutely love it. But so that first piqued my interest. I saw that. And then, of course, saw yourself and Bob, and I understand that there's bits and pieces going on in the background, quite a lot going on in the background with project. Is it Gravitaur? Yeah. Gravitaur. Oh, I just want to make sure I pronounce that correctly. First of all, can I just ask what first got you into the UFO UAP subject?
I've been in it for a long time. I used to be I was the youngest member of MUFON back in 1988. And I eventually became the national director for MUFON for the entire country of Canada. This is going back in my past. And I've been involved in it for a long time. I was also trained personally by David Jacobs in regards to alien abductions. I worked closely with a lot of the kids that were at Ariel Primary School in Rua, Zimbabwe. And over the years, I did a lot of research since the late 80s, and basically decided to start We Are Not Alone, which is our movement. And the first project we decided to do with We Are Not Alone was a project with Bob Lazar, and it's totally working out. So yeah.
So let's where did that start then? What is the project, and tell us all about it.
Project Gravitaur started off with like in a nutshell. 2 years ago, we wanted to create a professional version of the sport model that Bob Lazar had worked on. Actually, no, I should go back. We wanted to create a professional flying saucer. We wanted to recreate a model that was not cheesy, that was a really nice quality collector piece of a flying saucer, because there's none of that out there. Other than people who do them, let's say, artistically, or they do something like, say, they'll make 10 of them and that's it. But we're talking about industrially made. And that was the initial project. I decided that I'm a merchandiser, so I decided to reach out to United Nuclear, spoke to Zach, who works with Bob Lazar, and proposed the idea of saying, look, we've already done models in the past. We've done city buses and other type of products, and we want to do a professional flying saucer. And we thought the only person who we think would be able to help us with the interior of the craft, not the exterior of the craft, would be somebody who would have had to have firsthand, and not just somebody who got abducted, who saw something, while they're half asleep or whatever. We needed somebody who had firsthand, and that was Bob Lazar. So we said, would he be interested? Conversation went a little deeper than that, but Zach eventually spoke to Bob, and Bob agreed to speak to me. We got on a call. He kind of interviewed me, gave me a whole slew of questions of how would you do this if you wanted to do this? And I guess I had enough manufacturing experience that my answers to him were very positive. He liked what I said, and he said, let's do it. So I went out to Oregon, got to meet him. It was great. We spent few days together at his home in private to go through every possible detail of the sport model. And I'm talking about almost like engineering schematics. We're talking measurements and consoles and the type of the curvature of the craft and the angles and all that stuff. And I came back to Montreal, gave it to my team. I said, we have to create the digital file of this. We started creating a 3D digital file, and we started using Blender to create I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a 3D software. It's called Blender, and you can create anything if you want in Blender. And we created the craft. And as we were doing that, we had the idea, was like, okay, well, if we're going to create this professional craft, why don't we put it in a box that looks like where it was, which is the hangar. So we started, having Zoom calls with Bob. Anyway, we went from wanting to make a model to then recreating the hangar in a 3D environment, then expanding that into Unreal Engine, which is Epic Games has created a software called Unreal Engine that you could basically create anything in 3D. And if you know how to do that, and you have the right expertise on hand, you could create something that looks almost the same as reality. It's incredible technology, and you've got studios like Marvel that are using Unreal Engine now for cinema. So there's a lot of big production houses that are now using that for movies. And as we were progressing, we started seeing okay, well, if we're going to do the hangar, we're going to need Bob to give us all the information about the hangar. So I went back to Oregon, and I spent another 4 or 5 days with Bob about the whole base. I said, look, let's build the whole base in 3D. Let's see what that's going to look like. And so I went there. I had 178 questions, something like that. I had a book that I had questions for Bob about every possible thing. And it ended up being that plus another 300 things that we wrote down while we were together. And he was amazing to work with us. I'm going quickly, but Bob was very happy to see that we were very attention to detail. We wanted to get everything absolutely accurately, everything right. We saw that there was a lot of information that was on the internet that was not accurate. In fact, a lot of it was inaccurate. There was a few places that would have information that was making any sense to us, but most of the stuff that was out there had a lot of little inaccuracies that would create a lot of confusion to people who also criticized Bob based on those inaccurate pieces of information. So we wanted to kind of right all the wrongs, and we basically had Bob with us throughout the whole time. And he was such a very amazing person to work with. He was there. Every time we called him, it's like, hey, would you have half an hour for a Zoom call? And he'd say, sure, I'll do that. We wouldn't call him in the middle of the day, but we would make sure that he was available. And so 2 years of this was 2 years. And this is intense. I had contractors from Sweden, Finland, England, Lithuania, and Japan, including all our staff in Canada, in Montreal. And we basically built the craft. We built the other crafts that were in the adjacent hangars. We built, obviously, S4 itself. We built the hangars. We built Papoose Lake, the Papoose Mountain Range, which is right next to S4, and the whole road that goes all the way around the Papoose Mountain Range all the way to Groom Lake. So we have about a 10-mile wide virtual reality environment that is hyper realistic. Wow. And so with that, as we were growing, the software itself, Unreal Engine, was evolving every single time. So we would upgrade. And I think it was when they hit 5.1. I can't remember exactly, but when 5.1 came out, it was specifically designed to help cinema so that so somebody can make realistic shots for movies. And that was incredible. That was a huge leap for us as well, because it allowed us to take something that looks so real and make it look even more real, and allowed us to say, all right, now that we have this entire environment, very expensive to build, by the way. I could tell you, it's
I can imagine, yeah.
very expensive to build. Now that we have the environment, why don't we create? Like we were originally thinking, well, why don't we do a virtual reality experience so people could go through it, which is one of the products that we're going to be coming out with. But we thought, why don't we do a documentary with Bob narrating what this is all about? So we proposed it to Bob, and he had actually had an opportunity to see the environment a few times through Zoom calls. And he was blown away. He said, you guys did it. He goes, you not only did you create the environment, the craft is perfect. The interior of the craft is perfect. And I mean, we were very meticulous. This was a very, very meticulous group. My team was super attention to detail on this. And every step of the way was vetted by Bob. Every single thing we did, every color chosen, every material chosen, every texture chosen, every potential door, little window, light, exit sign, whatever, Bob was there to say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, I don't remember, but it must have made sense. You know, if you didn't know where to put a fire extinguisher, well, then, you know, he says, I wouldn't remember exactly where it was. You could put it there because it makes sense to put it there. Sure. So we built it, and we started interviewing Bob. We went to Nevada, and the whole DeLorean thing was something that came out of nowhere, by the way, because we were so serious about this project that it kind of became almost like a mantra inside the company, where we were like, we have to make sure this is accurate. And at a certain point, we were like, man, this is kind of, and even Bob said it, you know, he goes, it's one of the most boring places in the world. S4 was probably not, it was probably one of the boringest places in the world, except for what was in there. You know what I mean? Yeah. But other than that, it didn't have anything exciting. So we said, how do we bring a little bit of fun into this? We have to bring some fun into this. Otherwise, it's kind of fun, but we don't want to just go get the Bob Lazar fans. We want to get everybody. We want to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to see what this could have looked like. And I'm on my computer. I don't know what happened. Something popped up on my Facebook, and it was a company that was renting the Back to the Future DeLorean. And I thought, well, that's cool, you know, because we had kept saying to each other in the team, we kept saying, we got to bring everybody back to 1988 because that's when this happened. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. Why don't we use a time machine? But I thought, how am I going to use a Back to the Future time machine? Anyway, so I sent an email to the company. I said, I'm just curious. I go, how much does it cost to even rent this thing? You know? And the guy's like, well, it depends. You know, it's $300 an hour, depending on where you want it. And I said, well, I would actually want it in the desert in Nevada, close to Area 51 on a dry lake. And he says, that's going to be really expensive. He goes, that's not going to be like a normal thing. I said, but would you be able to do it? He goes, well, we have one in Las Vegas. I could probably arrange that. He says, why do you want to go out there? I said, well, I'm not sure if you know about this guy. His name is Bob Lazar. He's kind of known out there, and he's allegedly reverse engineered alien spacecraft. And this is the owner of the DeLorean rental company, answers me, goes, I have his email. I can't say his name. He told me not to say his name. He said, well, he goes, not only do I know Bob Lazar, he says, but I'm an aerospace engineer, and I used to work at Groom Lake at Area 51 for many years. Wow. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He goes, yeah. He goes, I worked out there on two human-made spy aircrafts. I never remember their names. It's like an X-71 or something like that. And he said, and I know a bunch of guys out there that believed Bob. I believe Bob. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, and I said, you got the freaking DeLorean from, you know, he goes, yeah. I said, we got to do this, man. I go, this is crazy. This is like, what's the chance of somebody working at Area 51, you know? So I called Bob and I said, because Bob's always been like super cool working with us, but he was always he's a very serious person. So I wasn't sure how he was going to react to this. I said, I go, Bob, I got something a little out of the ordinary. I said, we want to bring everybody back in time to 88. He goes, I know. I said, but we got to do it in a cool way. Okay. I said, I found a guy who's got the DeLorean from Back to the Future, and I could rent it. It's not cheap, but I could bring it out to the dry lake in Nevada, and we could fly you out there, and we would record you getting into the car, punching in the data in the car, and you driving off, and then we'll transition into our environment. And he was like, that's cool. I was like, hey, you like that? He goes, yeah. I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if you just got in the car? And he cuts me off and he says, and I'm Bob Lazar, and I'm going to take you guys back to 1988. I said, okay, we're doing it. I said, that's it. So that's how it all started. And we did it in the month of May. We got the car out there. It wasn't that simple to bring the car out there. Let me tell you, it's a bumpy road from the normal highway to a dry lake. You need a 4x4. So to have like a DeLorean, it was a special. Anyway, we had a whole crew out there. We got a full what do you call them, a motorhome out there for us to have, because it was hot. So we had air conditioning. We were a whole crew. Bob came out with his wife. We had some of his old friends from the time that were there out there on the dry lake. And we filmed for 2 full days. And we were not even supposed to drive the car. The guy that was renting it to us said, you're not allowed to drive it, because you could drive it, but you can't drive it like far away. You could just drive a little bit. And then when he saw Bob Lazar get into the car and he kind of saw our setup, he just looked at me and he goes, all right, man. He goes, I'll let you do it. He goes, just don't mess up the car. And I said, we won't mess up the car. And man, did we kill that car. we spent 2 days blasting that thing at full speed on a dry lake. You saw some of the shots, I suspect,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Look amazing.
And we blew up some bombs out there. So the explosions that you see in our video, those are actually Bob Lazar's explosions. So back in the day, I don't know if you know this, but he used to host Desert Blast, which was a big event that he hosted for many, many years out in the on the dry lake. And they used to blow up bombs. So Bob is an incredibly well-respected explosives expert. So when we were out there, we said, Bob, we got to, just before we went out there, so you think you could blow some stuff up? And he smiled and he goes, are you kidding? He goes, of course we will. so we said, we got to capture that. And we blew up 3 spectacular bombs out there and caught them from multiple different cinecams, drone cams, phones. So we have like these explosions from different angles, and they were recorded at 60 FPS. So we could do like slow motion burn. I personally think one of our explosions is better than what you see in Oppenheimer. I know I'm going a little bit too far with that, but Oppenheimer kind of was a little bit not that big of an explosion, in my opinion. It could have been bigger.
Yeah.
And ours was like spectacular. You could see like these 2 big mushroom clouds coming, like these fireballs coming out. So you're going to see that obviously in our documentary, but we show it a little bit in the teaser that we did with the DeLorean. So yeah,
that was, I mean, it makes perfect sense. You guys are trying to take people back in time to,
right.
to when Bob was in the hangar, and it couldn't be any better. It was that clip is fantastic, really fantastic. It
Thank you.
It took me back to my childhood anyway, and
right,
the DeLorean and Bob at the same time. It was just magic.
We were actually all worried, to be honest with you. We saw the clips and we all thought they were awesome, but we were like, man, how are people going to perceive this? Like, we don't want people to think that this is some cheesy gimmicky thing. And then we put it together and we looked at it, and Bob saw it and he goes, no, this is cool. He goes, this is cool, you know. So
Yeah.
we put it out there. We were happy with it. Obviously, it's the lighthearted part of our project, but wait till you see what we actually got in store for public. I mean, you're going to get the best access to S4 you've ever seen in your life.
I'm looking forward to it. So completely immersive. Is this something that's going to be coming out next year? Is it? I know that there's talk of the documentary next year.
So the documentary film is going to be launched early of 2024. We're hoping it's going to be February, maybe because of distribution agreements. It could just be delayed to March. We're sticking with that time frame. The documentary is called Lazar, the original whistleblower. That's our first product that's coming out. Within our documentary, there are hours of interviews with Bob Lazar. Well, hours. We have hours of interviews with Bob Lazar, so he's going to be narrating the scenes. You're going to be brought into these realistic environments. You're going to be in the hangar and the craft. We're going to be taking the craft apart. We're going to be in the propulsion lab where he's manipulating the gravity reactor. Everything will be explained with incredibly beautiful visuals. So that's going to be the documentary, and it's specifically concentrated on the S4 portion of Bob's story. Following that, which we expect to be maybe like the second quarter of 2024, we're going to be coming out with it's going to be called S4 The Experience, and that's our virtual reality experience. So that's where it'll be published most likely on Steam, where people can either play it on their phone. We'll have you could toggle, you could basically change it up to whatever quality you want. So it'll be phone ready all the way to super high computer, high powerful computer, or you can have your VR goggles on and go through the whole thing. Everything is interactable, so you can interact with every piece that's in there. Turn on lights, turn off lights, open doors, grab a paper, throw it on the floor. Like everything is very interactable, which is very interesting because it also becomes somewhat of an educational experience. Because if you know how to do what you have to do with those pieces, they'll work. We're doing it so it's programmed so it works, right? So if you know how to take the reactor and put all the pieces together, bring it into the craft, you know where to put it, bring down the waveguide, you'll turn on the craft. You know what I mean? And then there's going to be sections in our VR experience that are going to have a limitation. So whenever somebody is going to be within the Bob Lazar experience, you're actually experiencing what he saw. If ever you wanted to go past a certain perimeter in the corridor example where he did not go, you'll still be able to go there, but there's going to be something that'll show up on the screen saying you are now leaving the official Bob Lazar story. So whatever happens over there is creative. We took creative liberties to make it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so that it doesn't just block you to where he was. You could stay only where he was so you could see everything. But if you wanted to go to another hangar where there's another craft where he was never allowed to go, you could do that. You know what I mean? So, but it will tell you that you're no longer in the official Bob Lazar experience.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Where can people go? So where would be the best place for people to go to kind of keep an eye out and wait for the release?
Well, I'll tell you, everything is going to be coming out all at the same time. So a lot of the things that we do are on Instagram. We post whatever we have that's new on Instagram, our Facebook page. It's always Project Gravitaur. So you just go on Project Gravitaur on Instagram or Project Gravitaur on Facebook. We're also on TikTok. Our YouTube page is We Are Not Alone. So it's not under Project Gravitaur. It's under our umbrella, We Are Not Alone. So all you got to search for is We Are Not Alone, and you'll find our project in there. Where I'm going to be doing some new videos and presentations of what's coming very shortly. And then obviously our website, projectgravitaur.com, which gives anybody any updates of whatever is going to be happening or is supposed to happen. Now, we're going to be traveling again to the United States very soon, because we're actually going to be going out to Area 51 or the perimeter of, so that we could film a few final shots out there for our documentary. But I would say 90% has been completed in terms of filming, except for the Area 51 part. And there's a lot of goodies that are going to come out. We're going to let everybody know as they're ready. There's going to be some new information in it, which is interesting. There's going to be a lot of visuals that will be as valuable as new information. So when you hear about something, it's one thing. When you see it, you understand it a little bit better. And this is something that we felt was needed when we started getting into the details of things. I think a lot of people, when we were reading things, we thought, okay, people are just not understanding completely. There's some people were getting it completely, while others were completely off. So we wanted to make it so clear so that everybody could say, oh, okay, that's what he meant when he said that, and not somebody's perception of it. So whatever you see, whatever you'll be guided through with Bob will be an exact replica or a representation of what he experienced at S4 back in 88 and 89.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Well, I'm as excited as I'm more excited than everybody, because I've seen some of it. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, I can't wait for people to see this. You've probably seen some of the images off our social and all that.
Yeah.
But wait that you see the animations. You'll be very impressed with what we're coming up with.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Okay, cool. Can I jump into you specifically? And I know you've got a long kind of background in the subject. Where did that kind of start with you? Like for me, many years back, it kind of, my interest was peaked from TV and movies and stuff, but then it kind of died off for quite a while. Always in the back of my head, but it kind of died off. And I guess it was reignited around 2017 with the big piece in the American press. And well, where did that start with you? Is it a similar sort of situation, or was it later in life?
It was actually I'm originally Italian. My family is all from Italy. My mother was born in Rome. My father was born 200 kilometers from Rome. And there was a famous battle during the Second World War called Monte Cassino in Italy. And that's where my family is actually from. It was the largest bombing in the history of the Second World War, was at Monte Cassino. So, and my family was my grandfather was taken prisoner by the Nazis and brought to Germany in a concentration camp. And my grandmother was left in a very bad state, pregnant, and almost passed away with the bombings. So my family has a very heavy history with the Second World War. And my grandfather, who was a soldier in the Italian army as a prisoner, but before he was a prisoner in the concentration camp, was a soldier in the Italian army, was very familiar with aircrafts, very familiar with military equipment. And when he and my grandmother, along with my mother and my mother's sister, my aunt, moved to Canada in the very early, I think it was 1960, they were living in an apartment in Montreal in Canada. And back then, Montreal was a much different city. It was not as populated, very, very different. So from them coming from Italy to Montreal was a culture shock, especially to my grandmother, because, Italy was quite advanced at the time. Montreal was still up and coming. Anyway, my grandfather was on a balcony in 1965 with a very close friend of his who was a professional soccer player who was visiting him in Montreal. And they were outside on the balcony, and they had this big field in front of them. And they saw something coming in the air, coming towards them, and was very fast. That's what he said. It was coming in very fast. And so they said it was at the horizon when they stood up, because they could see it coming so quickly. And he says it flew right over them, and it was a silver disc on fire. He said there was actual flames coming off this perfectly round silver disc, and no sound, flew right over them. They ran into the apartment to go to the other side. My mom, who was a little girl at the time, remembers them running in to go to the window, and by the time they got to the other window, it was already at the other horizon. So that became a story in my family, because my grandfather kept saying, I saw a flying saucer, I saw a flying disc. And nobody believed him. Everybody was like, come on, that's not possible. Even his friend who was there was saying, no, we saw that. And his friend's wife and my grandmother was like, come on, that stuff doesn't exist. So he would always not talk about it. But I remember I was 9 years old when I was at the dinner table with all the family. And I mean, I'm born and raised Catholic, very conservative, very Italian. Like what somebody who could understand what that means it's a strict, upbringing. Okay, there's no talking about flying saucers or ghosts or anything like that. It's very, very religious, very old school, way of growing up. And my grandfather started talking about the time he saw a flying saucer, and everybody at the table starts saying to him, shut up with that stupid story, that's not possible. And I remember how upset he got, because he says, I'm not lying, I saw that, I'm not making this up. And they were like, yeah, you and your stupid flying saucer story. And he was like a mentor to me. Like he taught me so many things. And I remember thinking, that's not a man who lies. I know he didn't lie. He had such like good family values, and I was like, he's not lying. And so I went and asked him. I said, what did you see? So he explained it to me. And while he was explaining it to me, I could remember my grandmother saying, oh, don't bother him now with your flying saucer stories. But that caught my attention, because I thought, my grandfather doesn't lie. He's not the type. He's never been the type. He's gone now, but for his entire life was never a person who looked for attention. He was always a very good, wholesome, normal person. He was educated. He had a lot of military experience. I mean, he was in a concentration camp in Germany for 2 years. So he had a lot of baggage experience, but none of it was to ever show off, ever. And for me, that was something that caught my attention. I said, if he's not lying, then what did he see? What exactly was it that flew over his head that day when he was on the balcony? And I was very young. I ended up thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go to the library. Remember back then we would go to the library, because I don't know how old you are. I'm 48 years old. So back then you'd go to the library because there was no internet. There was nothing. There's just the library, And I was looking for books on astronomy. That's it. I thought maybe if they come from space, there might be information on them in astronomy books. That's how, naive I was. I was very young. And so I started reading adult astronomy books when I was like 9, 10, 11 years old. And my mother used to come in my room and go, what are you doing? Like, why are you reading these books? And I said, I'm just interested. I just want to know more. And I thought that the more I would read, the more I would get to the point where they would talk about the flying saucers, but it was never the case. And I thought, okay, this is not getting me in. By the way, I got a really good education on astronomy though. But so yeah, so I was actually very well versed in astronomy when I was young, still today, but much more. I forgot some of the stuff, but I eventually found out when I think I was like I believe I was 12 or 13 years old. I found out through something in the mail. I can't remember what I did. I must have requested something in the mail, because that's how we got stuff back then. And there was something that talked about MUFON. And I thought, what is MUFON? And I started reading about it. And I got so excited that there was a place in the world that was full of people that was looking into this phenomenon, that I thought, okay, I gotta find out how to be part of that. And I'm in Montreal, Quebec. So Quebec is very French, by the way. So there was a MUFON, believe it or not, there was a MUFON affiliate here in Montreal at that time. It was the French version of MUFON at the time. And I found out I looked it up in the phone book. They were there. I had my father drive me to one of their evenings where they would have all these people get together. And my father was very, very concerned about what the hell this was about, because he's driving me to a place where there's older folks talking about flying saucers and aliens. What is my kid doing? So he would stay there with me, but he was a very minded man. So he's also gone, but he was my absolute best friend, and he would never judge me. He just supported me, but he was always there to make sure that there was no crazy people that would, mess with me. And he realized that it was a group of normal people talking about things that might have happened. And I asked them how to join. They said, well, you have to join in the United States. So I sent my application. They helped me get my application. I filled it up and I sent it to the MUFON USA office. And they reached out to me and they said, well, you're the youngest guy we've ever had applying here. What's your specialty? They said, what was your specialty? And I remember saying, well, I really know a lot about astronomy. that was my specialty. So they actually wrote that. I have my original card from 1988, and it says, Luigi Vendittelli, and it has something about astronomy, 1988 MUFON. So, and that's how I started getting the MUFON journal at the time. And I started reading. And from that, I found out about Bud Hopkins and John Mack and Jacques Vallée and Stanton Friedman and all these people. And I started finding time to put money aside and buy books, and then, find a way to get their books and read those books. So I was kind of a geek when I was younger, because I was not only looking into space and planets, and now I'm looking into flying saucers and alien abductions and so on. So in 1988, I did a presentation on Gulf Breeze, Florida. I don't know if you remember the cases. It's a very, very famous. You should look it up. It's really interesting, and I'm sure you get a lot of really good response on it. Back in 1987, if I'm not wrong, in a place called Gulf Breeze, Florida, there was a huge amount of sightings of a UFO. And there was a very controversial guy that came out. His name was Ed Walters, who had taken pictures of this craft and also videotaped it. But he wasn't the only witness. I mean, we're talking hundreds of witnesses in Gulf Breeze had seen this craft. And the reason why I say it's controversial is because his pictures were so clear, it was scary. And he wrote a book. And then they accused him of being a fraud. But the accusations were actually not that good. And if you do the research, you come to find out that the people who accused him didn't really have much to accuse him with. So I was my first ever presentation at a MUFON get together was in 1988, and I had reached out to Ed Walters in Florida. He responded in kind. He sent me a VHS tape with his video and him talking to me. So I presented the Gulf Breeze, Florida sightings when I must have been like 13 or 14, something like that. And I stayed in that for a few years until I realized that I was not ever going to get a girl to come out on a date with me, because nobody cares about guys. Back in the late 80s or early 90s, if you believed in flying saucers, it wasn't a sexy thing. Okay. So I wasn't very popular because of it. So I took a break. I decided to take a step back, and I focused on school and getting on with life. But I always kept an eye open to the phenomenon. And back in I think it was like 2000 and maybe 2005, something like that, I started getting back into it. And I really did a lot of work to get back into it, read a lot to just catch up. and was lucky enough to communicate directly with two very important people that helped me. One is a professor from McGill University here in Montreal called Don Donderi. He's written a few books on the topic. PhD professor in perceptive psychology at McGill University in Montreal. We became very close over the years. He was a very big help to me, directing me to the right people. He had worked with John Mack in the past, so he knew Bud Hopkins as well. And through him, I got to speak to David Jacobs, who also had worked, who had been working in the alien abduction phenomenon research for many, many years. And I got an opportunity to go out to meet David Jacobs, spent a long time with him. He actually trained me for a while on alien abductions. I kind of found that to be one of the things that was most interesting to me. Was I had gotten to the point where I realized there's something out there. I realized, yeah, there's crafts out there. There has to be, not everybody's faking it. There's a lot of real stuff out there. But my biggest question was, well, if they're there, then what are they doing here? Like, why are they here? So it became clear to me that something obviously was happening to some people. And I got into the abduction side of it, and quite intensely for a few years. And then I basically started realizing over the years, having worked with a lot of people who've had experiences, whether they be abductions or experiences, and I got to become very close with some of the kids that were some of the witnesses that were children at the time in Rua, Zimbabwe, with the aerial landing. And that changed a lot for me, because having been close with them and realizing how society reacted to them. These are kids that had absolutely no interest whatsoever in flying saucers and aliens for a long time. They were kids in rural Zimbabwe in Africa in the 1990s. That was just a different era. And some of them had very serious post-traumatic stress problems because of it, not just because of what they saw, but because of how they were treated after. And that became something that I became, I guess, known for. So I had a lot of people reach out to me because I had become almost like their go-to person if ever they wanted to speak to somebody who understood and was going to be supportive. And I realized that there was something missing in the field that I could have brought to the field, instead of doing the standard research like so many amazing researchers out there today. There are amazing journalists, researchers, whatever, have done incredible amounts of work. And although I did become national director for MUFON in Canada for a while, I got kind of tired of those day-to-day sightings. And I started realizing that there's a lot of great people that could do this. And I think what was missing was a type of a movement in supporting the people who have had something happen to them and then be treated so unfairly by society. And regardless of how open we are, regardless of how much things have changed since 2017, and we see it now in mainstream media and congressional hearings, there's a lot of great things that have happened, but it's still a very touchy subject. If you say, I saw something in the sky and it looked like an object and I wasn't sure and it disappeared, you'll have a much broader, a much larger number of people that will support you now, as opposed to before. They'll say, yeah, I believe it's possible that there's flying saucers or there's UFOs or UAPs or whatever they call them now. But if you say, I had an experience and I saw someone or something, a creature or a living organism or something, that still is a very touchy subject that makes a lot of people stand back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is, unfortunately, what I call like selective discrimination today when it comes to that, because we're now become this society that is so open and understanding about so many things. I mean, everything is now being accepted, and we're not supposed to be laughing or making fun of anybody anymore. But if somebody says, I think I saw an alien and I think something happened to me, there's still a large number of population that will still go, come on, that's crazy. And it's not. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of crazy people out there who say they haven't had an experience, and it has nothing to do with the real people who've had experiences. So unfortunately, that muddies the waters because there's still a lot of people looking for attention. But that happens in anything, by the way. I mean, it's like a rape victim only because somebody faked to be raped doesn't mean no somebody else didn't get raped. So it's the same thing. And so when you would see the psychological and the stress that was happening to these people and how it was affecting them and their families, their relationships, their marriages, you could really clearly see that there was nobody really doing anything to address that. And that's where I decided to start We Are Not Alone, which is the WANA movement, which was specifically to raise awareness to the fact that if you hear that somebody has gone through something, before we jump to the conclusion of laughing at them or saying they're crazy, we could potentially be harming that person a lot more than they're already traumatized from what happened. So that's kind of where I decided to put my energy to a certain point. And in WANA, when we were building We Are Not Alone, it just happened to be just before COVID. We started it, and then COVID happened, and everything had to kind of be put on hold. And as things were progressing, I said, okay, well, we have to come up with very serious projects under the brand so that we could demonstrate who we are. And the first one being this project, Gravitaur with Bob Lazar. I can tell you that there's a really great one that will follow this one after, but we want this one to have all its light first. And it's really specifically so that people can understand that this topic, and this is why we invest so much money into it as well, by the way, is because if this topic is to be taken seriously by mainstream, well, mainstream, it's kind of a catch-22. Mainstream has to see how seriously invested people are into it. It's almost impossible to not have both happening at the same time in order for it to grow. So we decided to really put a tremendous amount of resources into it so that we could take a story of somebody and elevate it to a point where we could show the world this is possible. And so this is the first one. We fully support Bob Lazar, and the following one is going to be as great. Believe me on that. And it basically says this is a real topic. We have to stop. I hate when mainstream decides to talk about flying saucers or UAPs, and they always put like some type of weird music just before they have the journalists talk about it. That has to go away. That has to disappear. I mean, that to me is like they gotta stop that. That's like putting the Twilight Zone music before a woman says I was raped. Like it's just, you're completely disrespecting the story that's about to be told. So yeah. This is where we kind of go, no, we don't agree with that. We have to take this seriously. There's a serious topic. There's a lot of serious aspects to this subject matter, whether it be a project like Gravitaur, which highlights the reverse engineering secret programs that the government is operating, all the way to experiences where kids are playing on a playground and suddenly aliens appear and communicate messages about the planet to them. These are real things that really happen in the real world. This is not imaginary. This is not Looney Tunes or Walt Disney coming up with some story. This is real. So I think the world is now getting more and more ready for it. But as ready as they are, we have to keep reminding everybody, don't laugh about it. This is not a laughing matter.
Yeah. Do you, just on the abduction subject, there seems to be this sort of conflict with people in the conversation about abductions, in that one side tends to have this opinion that this is a very positive experience. It's for the betterment of society, of the planet. Right. And then there's this sort of other side, which is that there's some negative experiences that people are having that are bad. Do you, obviously you're deep into this, do you have any kind of a sense of why there is a conflict there, and if there's if there's any kind of lessons that you've learned from the people that you've spoken to?
Yes. Well, the first thing that I would say when it comes to whatever the perception was of the person, okay, this is, again, remember that in the alien abduction phenomenon, we are always basing ourselves on the person's response or the person's memory, whether that be a live memory or extracted memory through some type of hypnosis. There's a few things to take into consideration right from the get-go, okay? The first thing is, we do not know. Sorry, we'll start by saying we do know something happened to them, but we do not know who it was. We do not know if there's only one type of these unknowns. We do not know this. We can only assume by the research that demonstrates that there are different types of creatures, different types of beings. Some of them don't look the same. They're not always exactly the same. That has a ginormous impact onto the results that we're talking about here, whether they're benevolent, malevolent, it's a good experience or bad experience, whatever. So first off, we don't know who they are, and we don't know how many there are, okay? So that's super important. Secondly, within each of those categories, so if you can imagine, we as humans are one species, but our species is so incredibly diverse, and we are proving our diversity as we speak, as the world is bombing itself right now and killing everybody. So the fact that we are one species and we can't seem to get along ourselves and are fighting and are killing children on each side, and it doesn't seem to matter, we cannot omit that aspect of a species from a more advanced species. That doesn't mean that another species doesn't have internal conflict as well. So it could be that you have the same, let's call them the Greys, the most famous ones are the Greys. Some people say, I've had incredibly positive experiences with the Greys, and other ones say it was super negative for me. Well, maybe they didn't have the same action plan. Maybe it wasn't the same team. We might not be talking about the same project for them. And we have to remember that we just don't have all the data. We only have the end part of the story. And I've actually said this one time, a long time ago. I said this analogy, and it really says a lot about abductions, where people have a very malevolent experience. If you're walking down, I'll make you this example so you see where I'm going with this. So imagine you have a little daughter and she's like, I don't know, 14 years old, and you're coming out of a cinema with her and you're walking home, right? And you decide to cut through an alley so that you could get home faster. And while you're walking, this random person comes out of nowhere, punches you in the face, and knocks you half out and starts to try to rape your daughter. Now, this is a horrible situation, but this actually happens in the world. Now, in that moment, if there were witnesses there other than yourself and your daughter, you would know that that's the bad guy. Now, you come to and you get up and you're like, the first thing you do is you want to protect your daughter. So you jump on this man, you rip him off your daughter, and you start beating on him. I mean, it's a natural human instinct. If anybody says they wouldn't do that, they're not human. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's all agree that's pretty much what would happen in any culture, right? And suddenly there's a couple that decides to walk by, and what they're seeing is you punching this person, and in their mind now, you're the bad guy because they don't know what just happened right before. Now, the reason why I say that is because in the alien abduction phenomenon, we don't have the data of when the alien sat at the table and said, okay, tonight we're going to go get John, out of his bed, and we have to bring him into the ship because we need his sperm, because we have to go get Brenda and get her over. We don't have that information. We have none of that. All we have is this guy remembers a light and then remembers being on a table and he couldn't move, and there was a being with big black eyes and stared into his eyes, and he ejaculated, because that's oftentimes what you would have heard through alien abductions. And you go, well, what the hell was that all about? Well, we don't know that. We don't have all the information. So there's cases like that, and there's tons of those. And then there's the ones that say, oh, they talked to me. They told me that they're here to help us. They're here to better our society. And now there are two sides to that story as well. There's the side that it's possible, and I absolutely am open to that, and I hope that it's really possible. And then there's the side that David Jacobs, because David and I agreed on many things and sometimes didn't agree on some, but this is where I did agree with him. And he says, the aliens are neurologically more advanced than we are. Let's put that right away as the baseline. These are not creatures that are less evolved. They are neurologically more evolved. He says, so if they gave this impression to someone, this could just be manipulation. So we have to keep those things open. If we're having scientific discussions on this, we don't know either way. We don't know if it's that or that, but we have to keep them open. So there's possibility of multiple species, possibilities of different reasons for abducting within the same species. There's not enough data to tell us yes or no if it's good or bad. So there's 1,000 questions and like 2 answers. The only answers I could say without any doubt after all these years is yes, I do believe that there has been cases where people were taken by some unknown entities. I am ready to bet my life on that. I'm convinced of that. I do believe that these entities are maybe extraterrestrial. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're interdimensional. I don't know. But that to me is a certainty. And whatever they do, I don't think that they always recognize the traumatic, how they don't recognize the trauma that they can inflict on somebody by doing so. And maybe they think that we forgot about it, or maybe they think that whatever their mind control worked enough that we won't remember, but we do. So I don't have that answer, but what I do know is that it's for sure something has been going on, and I think it's possible that it's both good and bad. I think it's just very complicated, like we are very complicated. If you asked me, is humanity a good species?
Good point. Good point.
So yeah.
Luigi, I'm conscious of your time. I just wanted to get your take on one more thing, if that's okay. And
sure.
Just with regards to where we are today, and I wonder, do you think that we are likely to see any kind of formal disclosure? I know that we've kind of had some form of disclosure already, but in terms of, excuse me, in terms of a formal disclosure from the government, we have this. This is real, and this is what this represents. Do you think we're likely to see that?
I'm unfortunately too old to believe that will happen. Okay, I'm from an era that I just don't believe that's possible. Okay. Now, if you talk to the newer generation, they're a lot more optimistic about it. And I think that that's great. I just think that it's possible that if ever they do come forward and tell us that something is there, that it would probably not be what we should be told. I think that it's very likely that there's levels of this reality, and if there's ways for them to take the smallest little piece and say, here, this is true, this is manufactured extraterrestrial material, and it's true, we've been trying to figure it out and reverse engineering these little pieces. Okay, that to me is not that. To me, that will probably make the news for the next decade, and we would talk about it on every talk show and every podcast for the next decade. And it doesn't take away the reality that there's probably real craft somewhere else hidden in a bunker somewhere. So, or that it's been demystified, that they figured out gravity and that they found a way to go around the equation and they found a way to break through time. I don't know, but what I don't believe is that they'll just come clean with everything. It's too big. It's been hidden for too long. There's been too many people involved, knowingly and unknowingly. There's too much money invested. There's just too much at risk. It would be, people think, oh, well, no, society can handle it. It's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay at all. It's too big. We're not talking about finding a brighter LED flashlight. This is not, this type of disclosure would without a doubt would initiate a global movement to move away from fossil fuels and anything that could be potentially endangering our future. So if anything that comes out could give us a brighter future, but would completely demolish an existing economic world structure, it wouldn't be in our favor to crash the world's economic structure, no matter how good that future is, because there's a lot of people that rely on fossil fuels or electric battery markets now, and look at lithium batteries. If you want to invest into anything, look at the mining of lithium. I mean, it's a huge emerging market. So would we just suddenly just shut all that down and create havoc so that we could figure out how to lift something with an anti-gravity device? That's not, in my opinion, that's not feasible. That's not a good idea. That's not intelligent. So no, I don't think that we will have the full disclosure that we should have.
Okay, Luigi, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
thank you.
Hopefully
we'll stay in touch and perhaps speak again. And I'm certainly going to be keeping a close eye on your content in the coming weeks and months.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Take care, buddy. Thank you. Cheers.
Take care.